Well, hi everyone. I recognize some of the names on here, so I'm excited to be here. Many of you may know that I am a Colorado native myself. I grew up in Eastern Colorado in Yuma County in Yuma, part of a big cattle family out there. So I'm always excited when I get to do things in Colorado and be a part of Colorado events and things with the industry. So yes, I am the Director of Organizational Communications for the Cattlemen's Beef Board. And when I was talking with Aaron and the crew over at CCA, they really wanted to talk about what we do and how we handle our social media and some best practices about that. And of course, a large part of my job is to communicate with producers about what the Checkoff does. In fact, that's 90% of my job is producer communications at a national level. So I work with a lot of the state beef councils, a lot of organizations to try and communicate with producers, which I assume is a large chunk of who you're going to be communicating with on social media along with consumers. So in order to start off, what I want to do is spend a couple minutes doing with an overview of the Checkoff. It looks like, judging from some of the people on here, you already know this, but I'm going to go ahead and go over just a few things about the Checkoff because it'll give you some perspective as to why and how we do things at the CBB in terms of social media. So after a few minutes, we're going to dig in and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about communications practices around the best practices for social media and how to handle it when it just kind of blows up on you, so to speak. So to get started, a couple of housekeeping things. I told Aaron, if you have questions as we go, I work really fluid in my presentations. I'm happy to entertain them. You can put them in the chat function, or you can unmute yourself and hop and say, hey, Sarah, I have something to ask you. So you're welcome to do that. Or we will have time for questions afterwards, so scribble away. I do know that this is being recorded, so you'll be able to share it afterwards, and Aaron will make that available to you. So I do have my contact information later on so that you'll be able to reach out with any further questions. I'm happy to chat anytime. So to start off, let's talk a little bit about how the Checkoff came to be. You know, and many of you may know this already, but you know, back in the late 70s and into the 80s, we had a large problem in the beef industry. Our product was inconsistent. There was a lot of safety issues going around, and there was just this general sense of that beef was not good for you. And towards the early part of the 1980s, there were a series of things that were really the catalysts for causing beef demand to shift. And one of the first things that I like to talk about is the Beverly Hills diet. They came out in, and it seems kind of trite for a diet to come out and make a big splash, but you have to remember, this was a book. It came out in 1983. This was not in an era of Amazon. You couldn't just flip on your phone and order it and have it delivered to your house the next day. You had to actively go out and seek out this book, either through a catalog or your neighborhood bookstore. And yet it sold over 1 million copies. And the main focus of that diet was really anti-beef. It was really moving away from red meat. And because of the popularity of that diet, there were many things like the second image here, of all these little diets that popped up in the grocery store checkoff lines that really started to move you toward a vegetarian or a very low red meat diet. And even on Time magazine, they started to talk about bad fats, and red meat got looped into that. Well, what that caused on the producer side, the beef industry side, is a huge tanking of beef demand. People started to choose chicken, they started to choose fish, and all of a sudden our ranches started to have problems. We lost almost 400,000 producers in the first half of the 1980s because the demand was not there. People couldn't sell their cattle. They were relatively worthless, so to speak. And I lived through that. I remember that time with my dad. So the other piece of the pie is that there was no unified voice in the industry. So there was different organizations, cattle associations, there were some beef councils. It was kind of a mix of different groups trying to explain our way out of this mess. And there was really no consistent promotion. Now the states did some amazing stuff on their own, but as you can see, like, where's the beef? That didn't even come from our industry. That came from Wendy's, and it was still one of the most iconic campaigns ever, but that wasn't even coming from us. So we weren't even driving our own ship. And then by the early 90s, you may recall the Jack in the Box, where we had a large outbreak of E. coli in their hamburgers in the Pacific Northwest that actually killed 5 children. When that happened, our basically everything fell apart in terms of people wanting beef. It was just a series of things, and these are just a few of the highlights. And to make it look a little bit different, in a different way, this is a cattle facts slide I like to use that shows that in 1980, people were buying beef. It's like they went to the grocery store, what's for dinner? It's beef. But because of all these different safety issues and grocery store checkout articles and talking heads and Oprah and all these things, you can see by the mid to late 90s, we were in big trouble. So where did the Checkoff come into be? A group of producers around this time were noticing that their friends were going out of business, and they were seeing that beef was not in high demand, and they had gone back and forth with Congress and with producers to try and build a program just to stop this frankly, this big drain. And so the Checkoff was created by a team of producers, and it was implemented in 1986 with a referendum that passed in 1988. And now that demand is less on just we've been able to constantly move that needle. A rising tide lifts all boats. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So what is the Checkoff? It's basically an act of Congress that allows us to have a group that does the things we need it to do, to research the safety and the nutritional value of beef, to educate consumers about beef, and educate producers about how to help raise healthy and sustainable beef, and to promote beef, to make it, whether it's the fun campaigns or just grocery store recipe cards, whatever it is. Right now it's a lot of social media and influencers and things. That's what it was created to do. And it's $1 per head across the country, or if you're an importer, you pay it too. You pay the equivalent of $1 per head on your box beef, and that money goes partly to the states and partly to the national program. So what can't it do? This is important because when we talk about social media here in a minute, this is particularly important, and I'm sure that this will also be relevant in your neck of the woods as well. There's some things that your organization does and some things it doesn't. It's the same way with the Checkoff. The Checkoff can't do anything having to do with government policy or regulation. So we get our fingers pointed at us quite frequently about certain things, particularly labeling or imports and exports. Those are things that we cannot influence as a Checkoff. It's against the law. We can't spend even a dime of Checkoff dollars to do so. And we can't disparage another commodity. So we can't come out and say that beef is better than Impossible Burger or better than chicken. We have to align them side by side and said, here's beef, here's chicken, make up your own mind. But we have to do things within the law. So these are things we can't do. But what can we do? We can move the needle on demand, and we have done so. But basically the bottom line is, what is beef demand? Beef demand is when someone's sitting on their couch on a Friday afternoon going, what sounds good for dinner? And they say, you know what, we're going to grill steak tonight. It's the sentiment. It's the idea that everything is in place to make them want to buy that beef. It's a safe product, it's a healthy product, or a product that has health benefits to it, that they saw some kitschy, that they saw a great recipe, that they saw it on TV. All of those things come together to make them want to buy that beef. That's demand. And it sometimes gets mixed up with consumption, which is a little bit different. But how do we do this? How do we do all these things to educate, promote, and research about beef in order to drive that sentiment? Well, we do it in 6 areas. In the law that's created for the checkoff, we can only do these things. And this is important when we talk about social media here in a minute for where I live, is we can do promotion, research, consumer information, so information like recipes or details or workshops, industry information, so things that we can share with other entities like you guys at the CCA. Foreign marketing, we can actually promote our beef overseas and encourage that export. And producer communications, which is where I live. There's a part of the law that says I have to be able to communicate back to producers how their money is being spent. Now, I wanted to just briefly touch on this, and I promise we're almost done with checkoff stuff, and then we'll go into social media. But I think it's important too, because the checkoff is so vast that there is a state component and a national component. So the states actually have state beef councils, and those councils across the country are charged with collecting the dollars. So at the sale barns, in private treaty, with brand inspectors, it just depends on what part of the country you're in. And those state beef councils keep 50 cents and then send 50 cents on to the national office. So that relationship with the states is very important to us. And when we work with social media, we tend to work at the state level, especially if issues come up in certain areas. And then our responsibility is to oversee that collection, make sure it's happening, make sure that those dollars are coming in appropriately in accordance with the law, and to support those state beef councils and their programs from a national perspective. So there's a lot of interactive communication back and forth, and that's important, especially with, when you have kind of who you have in your back pocket, so to speak, when you're doing social media is really important, and the states are definitely a huge backbone to our program. Really quickly, I wanted to bring this up because we're in Colorado, and we do have a Colorado officer on our board right now. One thing that's important to note is the checkoff is completely driven by producers. Right now we have 99 board members. 92 of them are beef producers. So they're cow-calf feeders. Some of them are backgrounders, dairy stockers. And then because importers pay into the checkoff, they have representation on our board, and there are 7 importers from across the country. But our officer team right now has Jared Brackett, Hugh Sandberg, and Norm Voiles, and Hugh is from Colorado, which is pretty awesome to have a national officer. And in fact, you probably recognize some of these people on here. These are the Cattlemen's Beef Board members from Colorado. And so some of you may know these guys. Steve actually is an importer. One of the few importers on the board is actually from Colorado. These other 3 actually are cow-calf and backgrounders, so you may know them pretty well. Okay, so producer communication. So part of what I do is communicate with producers, and I'm going to give a real quick snapshot of our program, and then we'll dive into social media. So one of the things that we do is do all types of communications that try to reach producers around the country. Now, a producer in Colorado looks very different than a producer in Pennsylvania. And that looks very different than a producer in Louisiana. And that looks very different to a producer in California. And so not all things fit. And I think that's important to note with your social media as we go into that here in a minute, that we have a vast variety of communication channels that we use. We use print newsletters. The state beef councils have inserts into those newsletters. We use press releases. We have websites. We have social media. And I encourage you to not hang your hat completely on social media for your organization, especially if you're focusing on producers, because they tend to vary in how they take their communications efforts. It's, of course, much more cost effective to put things up on social, but it might not be reaching as many people as you think. So We can talk a little bit more about this in the question and answer, but we have found that we have to do a variety of things in order to get our message out across all these different type of producers and different age groups. So we do a lot of different things. Our main focus, and this is important, I share this mostly because I think it's important to any organization. We have those people in the checkoff that really love us. They're over here on this, on the right side here, and they really love us, and the checkoff can do no wrong. We have people over here on this other side that don't necessarily love us, and there's nothing we can do to change that. The people that we focus on are these middle, we call it the movable middle. And this movable middle piece is really important for you to determine who those are in your organization, especially if you're dealing with social media, because you're likely not to change the opinions of anyone coming from these side pillars. What you need to worry about are the ones in the middle. So if this person dislikes your program and they are getting engaged and possibly touching against some of these that are kind of in the middle, that might cause them to swing back into the negative pillar. Now, if somebody over here gets on social media and starts talking and they're like, well, that's true, that's right, here's a link, it proves that this guy is completely bonkers and it's strongly approved, then they might swing the other direction. And so your focus, instead of trying to change the world with the people who love you already or the people who dislike you already, always look towards the middle, and that you'll see that as a main theme. So we've talked about this a little bit. We do a lot of different things. And the reason I bring this up, because this is a lot of this content that we use in our e-newsletters and our print newsletters, we reuse in our social platforms, because that makes the most sense, is to get the most bang for your buck, is to share it, create once and share 6 or 7 different ways. So I encourage you to dig deep into your organization for content. And we're going to talk about some different ways to do that in a minute here. One of the things that we do is educate people about the checkoff. And so we do that in a variety of ways. We have a really good working relationship with the National Ag Media. But whenever we put out something like this, you know, whether it's Greg's column about the beef checkoff, we always that same day have it out on social, and we always have it on our website immediately. That way, if any of these media sources need to link to something, or you can hashtag and connect them to that, then they have some place to digitally link to and to share. So there's a little bit of that. If you have pieces that you're pushing out, whether it's a column or opinion piece or something from your organization, you want to make sure that you are using that not just as a press release, but also as a content piece that can be shared across multiple channels, including your social media. Okay, so enough about the checkoff. Let's talk about social media. And I'm going to kind of dive in and talk about how we use it and what we do with it. And I encourage you to ask lots of questions if you need to, or if you have any questions, let me know. We've done extensive research when it comes to producers. Now, consumers are a little slightly different, and we'll talk about that. But when we look at our producers and our more or less our members of the checkoff, we have done a lot of research, and they live almost completely on Facebook and Twitter. Even the young ones, it's amazing. And you think that that they're, you know, I tend to think like, really, Twitter? But it tends to be that they do focus there. I think they see both of these as almost like a news source, and especially among their colleagues. So we tend to focus very heavily in these 2 areas because that's where the producers live. We have started to do some work in LinkedIn because that's where the thought leadership is. That's where the industry leaders, the grown-ups, so to speak, live. That's where, you know, a lot of the CEOs, a lot of kind of the movers and shakers share information there. I'll use the example Cattle Facts. I think everybody probably is familiar with that organization. They're in LinkedIn. They share something every single day, some tidbit, some slide, something every single day. We can do that too. And so we're moving toward being a more information source for leaders through LinkedIn. Now I put Instagram down here at the bottom because we're watching Instagram closely. The issue with us is we don't want to spend a lot of time and energy developing another social media platform unless there's just a lot of producers on that platform. Now, some of the younger ones are on there, and when I say younger, I'm saying under the age of 35. That's a group that we constantly try to capture, and we see that, but we see a lot of connection between Facebook and Instagram. We still see those younger producers still on Facebook. So we're kind of monitoring this. Of course, if you're a consumer in a city, Instagram is where it's at. But in terms of producers and actually beef industry, people, these are the two we focus on. So how do we do that? How do we actually use social media to reach producers? And this is, something really important that you should do first and foremost is when you create your posts, you want to share your news. There was a long time where, prior to my coming onto the beef board, where the Checkoff had a lot of memes and a lot of kind of lighthearted posts and kind of quotes from people with pictures, and that has its place. I'm not saying it's not good. I'm just saying be mindful of what your franchise is. Is your franchise to provide humor? Is your franchise to provide information? What does your organization, what do you do to make sure that you are abiding by your role in the industry? Our role as the Beef Checkoff is to share the news of the Checkoff. That's what my program's role is. So the first thing we do, 10 ways USMEF is promoting US beef around the world. This is a story. It just came out a couple days ago on our Facebook page. It's a story that we had already written for one of our other newsletters. So we turned around, that published, and then we turned around and used on social media. Our first goal in the Checkoff is to, in terms of my program and what the social media platform is about, is to share the news of what's going on in my area or in my program. The second thing is to share news and views from other sources. We tend to call that out. So just so people are clear, we say good read. And if you see, this particular piece is by Beef Magazine. So when we share something like that, we tend to call it out as something that isn't coming from us, but is probably pretty interesting to read nonetheless, again, as an information source. So this is talking about antibiotic use. And so it's all these producers throughout Kentucky that had shared their personal stories and done all these videos on their operations. And so we shared it because it was in line with our program. So I encourage you to find those sources that also have news and views that you can share to supplement your social media, even if it's your personal social media. The other thing is to extend media releases and columns. So I mentioned Greg's pieces. We always put that out there. If our officer team releases anything, I know CCA does a really good job of this. Anything upcoming, any opportunities to interface with any of the officer teams. But anytime you push anything out, make sure it's on all of your social media platforms. And we'll talk a minute about the anatomy of a good post here in a second here. One thing that the entire world has gotten used to is virtual events. I think they're horrible, but I guess it's what we're in right now. I'm kind of a person-to-person person. So, but one thing that we can do is encourage engagement and encourage people to be a part of our programs by pushing things out. This particular event was in September, or actually it was in August, I think, and it was multi-commodity. So it was pork, beef, corn, and soy, and they had all of the chairs of those boards on a webinar. together talking about the pandemic and how their particular commodity has fared. And so, you know, it was a great opportunity to showcase kind of agriculture across the board, and we announced it in many different ways, but social media was one of the best ways. So if you have things coming up, make sure that you are pushing those out. Or if you know something from someone else that would benefit those who are members of your pages, make sure you're sharing that too. Educate. Um, that's another piece. So for instance, sometimes it's not a deep reach. I mean, frequently asked questions, part of our website, has been there since the beginning of websites. I mean, what almost every website has a frequently asked questions or some type of about us page. So sometimes it's just going back to the beginning. Do you have questions about the beef checkoff? Visit our frequently asked questions page. It's something as simple as that. So look at what kind of resources you have that have not been tapped into for a while and put a post out about it. What's interesting is when we've done this a couple times on our national social media, and our hits skyrocket. I mean, like 400% month over month when we push these out. Like, people evidently have questions and don't even think to go to the frequently asked questions until they're asked to. So, you know, think about what you have in your organization that you can share that might be right in front of you. Just make it new again and help educate about your programs. And show appreciation. I think this works in almost any business. But of course, think of the things and the places where you can show appreciation. Of course, October 12th, National Farmers Day. We do special ones for Mother's Day, Grandparents' Day. We have all original photos from all over the country of producers. And so we just try to really say thank you. Thank you for putting it on. Thank you for being connected to our organization. Thank you for your support. Thank you, blah, blah, blah. Just thank you. Show appreciation. Figure out different ways to appreciate all the different people that connect with your social media pages at least once or twice a year. Okay, so I'm going to give you the 6 steps, and then we're going to have some open discussion here. The 6 steps for strong social media presence. And I haven't seen any questions. So Erin, interrupt me if there's any questions before I get started on this. The first thing, the number one thing to do when you're looking at your social media pages is to know your audience. And my little parentheses, and by know, I mean consider all sides. Who is coming to your pages? And if you don't know, go into the analytics of Facebook and Twitter and look. You can actually see a lot of detail about where they're coming from and who they are. Are they even in Colorado? Are they from other states? Are other people following us? Are they even, the people who are engaging on your pages, are they even members of your organization? Know your audience, and know, like, if you're with the here at the Checkoff, it's like, I know that 80% of producers across the country love our program and about 20% don't. So consider all sides. There's going to be different sides of your organization, and there's going to be different sides of your program. Know who they are before you go in there, so that you're not surprised, and so that you can cater to both. I would say cater to the 80%, but you have to understand that that 20% is still out there. And so you have to be able to look at what you're doing through their lens. So number one, know your audience. It's the first thing you need to do. Otherwise, you'll appear tone deaf through the rest of these pieces. Number two, let's talk about what the anatomy of a good post. Okay. The key message is really important. And we typically sit down with my team once a year and come up with the key messages that we're going to spread throughout the year. So that might be, collaboration, sustainability, exports. It might be that we need to ensure that that producers are doing great and capitalize on the positive. If they're not doing great, since the pandemic changed all that, talk about what's real life for those producers. Look at the key message. What is it that you want the takeaway to be of your post? Bold visuals. Posts without bold visuals, people don't even see them. And so look at that. Make sure that you have really good, high quality photography or charts or graphics. And if you don't, look until you do, because gosh, now you can have moving videos and things. Make sure that they're high quality. And with your visuals, if they are video, make sure they're not too long. We tend to say 90 seconds or less is about the longest you can go in terms of a video online, unless it's a recording that they're watching, like for instance of this presentation. But if it's just a snapshot of a producer or someone being interviewed, make sure it's under 90 seconds long. A consistent voice. Determine what the personality is of your organization. Is it professional sounding? Is it more person-to-person sounding? Is it more personable? Is it all sunshine and rainbows? Is it more hard-hitting? Determine what that looks like and be consistent. So with our pieces, we tend to speak producer to producer. So occasionally we miss that mark. I'm like, I don't think producers sound like that. When I'll catch a post and be like, I don't think that really hit because it doesn't sound like anything we'd say. So find that consistent voice for your program and use that. And then a clear rhythm. So we tend to push out themes every quarter. So every 3 months we have a theme. So right now we're doing a lot on exports and beef around the world, and where US beef shows up around the world and how it's changed because of the pandemic. So over the next 3 months, we'll be doing on social, we'll be doing pieces about that exact topic. We'll be doing radio spots. We'll be doing articles in our newsletters. We'll be doing interviews. We'll be placing columns in magazines all around those themes. And I'm not saying you should do a quarterly theme, but that works really well for us. And it starts to feel like a clear rhythm. We can say across the team over the course of a year, you know what? Let's save that until we're talking about BQA in January. That piece would go better then. And give that, I truly believe that followers on social media sense that kind of piece. You can tell, like if you're on Facebook nowadays, you can tell the holidays are coming. You can feel it ramp up. People are starting to have sales, and all of my friends who sell makeup are starting to try and ramp up their sales. All those things, there's a clear rhythm. It's like it's that time of year again kind of thing. Determine what that rhythm is in your group and follow that very closely. And then impactful formats. So think about what it is you're sharing. One thing that we need to do a better job of, frankly, I think, is to highlight more of producer stories. Like maybe it's about some of our beef board members, and to have social media posts that talk about them with pictures of them and talk about who they are. But having interesting formats, and is it a story feature? Are you going to always tell a story? Are you always going to be reactionary to a news article? Is that going to be your shtick? Are you going to have connected boomerangs that capture attention? So maybe it's 3 pieces about exports and then a piece about an importer. Is it, a whole piece about the wildfires, and how they're affecting your state and your producers in your state, and then turn around and talk about how they've overcome or what happened afterwards? Always have impactful formats, and determine what those formats and what your topics and what your kind of your general, is it going to be like a feature article, or is it going to be a hard-hitting news? Determine what that is. It can be a mix. Just know yourself. Know what that is ahead of time, and that helps a great deal. Know which social media platforms work with your message or organization. So if you're me and I'm working with trying to communicate with producers, If I can't stand in front of them at a sale barn, then the next best thing might be social media, and it might be Facebook and Twitter. But we're constantly asking the question, we're constantly monitoring that. For your organization, it might be slightly different. How do you reach out? You need to do the research to make sure that you're not spending all this time on Snapchat when they aren't there. And believe it or not, Snapchat is used by producers pretty frequently, especially in their own operations, surprisingly enough. But you need to be able to look at that and determine which ones work best in reaching those, reaching who your followers are, who your followers should be. Encourage engagement. So social media is not just a news source. Social media is supposed to be social. It's supposed to have some give and take. And if you're putting out a lot of posts that aren't having any likes or any people commenting, you might need to rethink your strategy a little bit, because like for instance, these are my do's and my don'ts for my program. And what your do's and your don'ts are might be slightly different, but I'll share with you what I do want to do on the Beef Checkoff social pages is I want to listen. So we use it as a platform to look at what people are saying. We want to drive traffic to other places like our website or to some of our articles and other pieces. We want it to be a place where people click through for more information. We're just putting it out there for them to go to other places. And we want to amplify. And by amplify, it's what I was saying about a piece that shows up in a newsletter can be on social media, or if it's an interview with Greg Haynes, our CEO, that can turn around, that was on radio, we can turn around and share it on social media. We can ask the state beef councils to share it on social media, and it amplifies that one interview into a bigger message. So those are the things we focus on in my team. Now, what we don't want to do is have a comment which happens daily, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but there are plenty of people that go in there and bomb our pages. We don't want to censor them and block them, and we actually don't block people on our site. And we do not want to be baited. We don't want them to put things up there knowing that there's no winning scenario for us to engage with them on social. So those are our kind of quote unquote rules of engagement. So you need to determine what those do's and don'ts are in your world and stick by them, and determine the rules of engagement. Is it worth going in and commenting back to someone or not? Measure your results, number 5. This is really important, and there's so many analytics that go along with these social media platforms that can tell you whether you're getting anywhere or not. Are you actually getting people to click on it? If you're not getting likes, are you at least being seen? Who's been on your pages? How many followers have you gotten? When I started the Beef Board 2 years ago, we had 3,000 followers. Now we have 75,000. And I really attribute that to a big shift in the way that we focus our social media and how we do that. So we are constantly looking at those results and saying, is this working? If it's not, we tweak it a little, and then we just keep tweaking until we started getting more and more followers and more engagement, to the point where now we feel like we have a good body of producers to speak to when we put something out. So measure results so that you know that you're not working really hard on this and not getting anywhere. And then lastly, responding to comments and posts. Okay, so I saved the best for last because we get a lot of chatter on our Facebook pages, a lot of chatter. And we have learned to look at it for what it is. Sometimes it's positive, sometimes it's not. We tend to kind of watch and see who it is that's talking. It's typically the same 40 people on our pages when they comment negatively. We kind of know who those people are, but we don't block anybody. And that was something we changed a couple years ago. And it's not that you certainly, sometimes they can really say some things that make you want to block them. But the fact of the matter is that no matter who they are a producer, and they most likely are paying into the checkoff. And so we don't block people on our social media pages, but we do monitor, and we do corrective action. We will go in there and say, the checkoff doesn't deal in labeling. It goes against our policy. Please remove this. And we'll say, or we will, kind of thing. And we try to play nice. But we don't want to give them a platform for their views on our pages. They can do that on their pages if they want, but we're not a general platform for them to garner membership or whatever that may be. So there's a balance. And so what I would say when you're responding to posts and comments, it kind of goes back to number one, knowing your audience. Do you know who this person is? Do you know who they're affiliated with? Are they baiting you into an argument? Make sure that when you are responding that it's factual or has links to factual information, or take it offline and say, I'd love to chat, or private message them and say, I'd love to chat with you personally. Here's my phone number. I'm in the office tomorrow morning. I look forward to it. You'd be surprised at how many people have actually called me doing that. Sometimes they just want to be heard and they think social media is it. But it's kind of like I say, darned if you do, darned if you don't. It's one of those things where you don't want to appear not to be paying attention. But it is really important to monitor and be aware of the motives behind those that sometimes will post on your pages. So I know I went fairly quickly. I wanted to allow a little bit of time for some questions. This is my contact information. I'd be happy to chat with you even further. If any of you want to, you're welcome to give me a call or zip me an email. We have learned a lot in social media over the last few years. These are the best practices that we look to and that we abide by. But I will be quiet now and see if there are any questions.
Are there any questions for Sarah? I would remind you that you can unmute yourself at the bottom of your screen, or if you're on your phone, it's *6 to unmute.
I don't have a question, but I know what it's like to present and have nobody say anything. I just think that was very, very helpful. Really, really good information and really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm happy to do it.
Well, Sarah, I don't see any question. Oh, there might be one in the chat. Todd Ingley says, can you share where to find CBB materials that can be shared on social media?
Sure. Some of those, Todd, we make available to the beef councils, and then you guys can make them available. We do have, if you have some materials that you would like to share on your topics and things, we can share them with Todd and crew and they can get them out to you. We do have some places where you can log in and get some of that information. It's gated, and so we'd have to just kind of do it on a case-by-case basis, but we could talk about that too. But we do have social media calendars that we do a month in advance so that state beef councils can know what is happening before it happens. So that might be something we can share more broadly. I am trying to think. I'm trying to answer your question well, Todd, and I'm not doing a great job, but that is something that we'll put some more thought to. But we do have those calendars ahead of time, so you would know what's coming down the pike, and you could decide to share it or not share it. So what might be best is if I'm working with CCA to talk to Erin and find out the best way to get some of that information out there, we tend to post 2 times per week on Facebook and twice a week on Twitter, sometimes 3 times, but we find that daily is too much. It just doesn't get the engagement. So we plan out, you know, about 10 posts a month, 10 to 12 posts a month ahead of time. So if that's valuable, we could share something like that so you could see. We also have lots of photos and things like that that we're happy to share. So let me know. We do have some from Colorado. We were out at Kenny Rogers' place a couple years ago, and so it's mostly winter. It was really cold. It was like nine below zero when we were out there. So we do have some Colorado photos. We're looking to get more, but you're welcome to use those too. So just reach out to me and we can get you some materials.
Thanks. I was just trying to think if there was something outside of, somebody wanted to do something outside of contacting the Beef Council, of other producers or something, somebody wanted to share something, how that works. So
yeah, we need to think of about that a little bit better, Todd. I mean, you bring up a good point as how to share it so that you can share it. I would definitely follow us on our Twitter and Facebook and share away. We tend to do hashtag beef checkoff on all of our contractor pieces. So not just producer communications, but all of our programming throughout the entire checkoff does hashtag beef checkoff. So if you follow that hashtag, you'll see things being done in Veal and all the way in the Northeast, or different programs that are being done with Beef It's What's for Dinner. All of them use either hashtag beef checkoff or hashtag beef farmers and ranchers. So you could always do the hashtag and be able to see everything that's going on at the checkoff at any given time in social media.
Hi, Sarah, this is Sharon O'Toole, and I do a blog on our ranch, and I have lots and lots of photos. Would you like some photos contributed to you?
Oh, we would love it. Yes, especially to have it have some real stuff. That's the best. We would love that.
We're ladderranch.com, and then you go to Ranch News for the blog. But I mean, all of us in the family take tons of photos. So if we have good ones, I'll email them.
Yes, that would be great. And if for some reason they're too big, just zip me a note and we'll figure out how to file share those. I would love to be able to use some of that on the national level. Hi, Libby. I see your chatter. Curious about whether you have any tips on event promotion on social media. Yes. What we have found works really well is, I call it the mother post. So have the post out there. So for instance, that commodity webinar, put it out there and then encourage your people to share it. So, whether it's your board or your coworkers or your family members, once it's out there, get them to share it, almost like they have to, like by penalty of death have to, because what it does, it just amplifies that message. The in-person pieces tended to work a little bit better. We would start promoting a month in advance for those in person, unless there was registration or things. But like if we knew that there was going to be, for instance, that the officers were going to be at an event in Kansas City, we would start promoting that they were going to be there, that you should come by, that that they're going to be there at these dates, and we would push it out to media. So it kind of depends on how broad of an event it is. Is it statewide? Is it just for certain members? Is it nationwide? Is it virtual? But a good rule of thumb, I think, is to make sure that you give yourself plenty of time, and then it's repetition. So much of social media is repetition, either getting people to reshare it or that you remind people, oh, don't forget, because if you can kind of gauge on the engagement piece, how many people are engaging with those posts, and if they're down, then you need to change something, change the image, make something a little more humorous, or give them, an impetus to be more mindful that they need to register. But social media speaks to you. If it's not if it's not happening and people are scrolling on by, then something needs to be adjusted. And sometimes that's hard because you're like, I liked that post, but sometimes it just needs to be switched up a little bit. And maybe a different photo of a different producer, or I know Libby with BQA, you know, maybe it's instead of stockmanship and stewardship with the corrals, maybe it's just a bunch of people, you know, in the audience looking at it. Maybe it's just a different picture or photo of producers being engaged that would just catch people's eye. It could be as simple as that to make sure people see it.
Thanks, Sarah. I know we've had a lot of questions from producers on hashtags. Can you just give a brief kind of the outline about the significance of hashtags and maybe go on Facebook and Twitter, the different platforms?
Sure. So hashtags ultimately originated in Twitter. And it was a way to capture a bunch of tweets together. So if I did hashtag beef and I was a nutritionist, and if I did hashtag beef and I was a veterinarian, you could go into hashtag beef on Twitter and find all of them. You can find anybody who did hashtag beef, regardless of who they were. You'd be able to find all the tweets that had that hashtag. So it was kind of a way to thread them all together. Well, people started using hashtags other places. And so they started to show up in Facebook. And at first, everybody's like, hello, hashtags don't work in Facebook. It's a Twitter thing. But then Facebook kind of said, well, if you're going to put them here, we'll make them work too. And they did the same thing. So the hashtags, now you can do them in Facebook as well. And so anybody who does, for instance, hashtag beef farmers and ranchers, or hashtag beef checkoff, you can go into that hashtag and you can see everybody who hashtagged that at the bottom of their post. We require the national dollars, the contractors that do work on our behalf with the national dollars of the checkoff. Anytime they post on social media, they have to have one of those two hashtags so that somebody, for instance, a producer in Colorado can go in there and see what's going on, you know, that Beef is What's for Dinner is on Times Square billboards, or you know, that there was a big influencer event in Arizona. It could be anything that's going on with the checkoff. And so it's basically just a thread. It's just a way to thread things together. In terms of creating them, you can create them being whatever you wanted. So it could be hashtag Ladder Ranch. It could be hashtag I love Colorado beef. It could be anything. And then you just get people to start hashtagging it with you. And once that happens, then you start to have a thread that builds up. So it's important if there's a lot of different players in your organization, especially, or that you want to amplify that. The other symbol that has shown up is the at symbol, you know, like in your email at Yahoo, or that at symbol. So for instance, in Twitter, if they do at beef checkoff, it's a way to ping me in my beef checkoff account saying, hey, I talked about you. It's kind of like tagging a picture in Facebook. You can do that in social media. So it'd be like at beef checkoff, I'm talking about you over here. Hello, are you gonna come over and say hi? So it's a little bit different than the hashtag. The at piece is kind of calling you onto the carpet. And that's a way to say, like, at Beef Magazine, this was a great article, and then a link to their page. And it just notifies Beef Magazine that we're talking about them over on our pages. So those two sometimes get a little mixed up. Important though, important in terms of amplifying your message. Does that help? Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. And I'm sure there's way more than that. I need to talk to, I have 7th and 9th grade boys, and I swear they teach me more about social media than any school I'd ever been to.
Are there any other questions for Sarah? I don't see any coming in. So thank you, Sarah, for that presentation. I think it was really helpful. And thank you all for joining us. I would remind you all that This is being recorded and will be on our YouTube channel as well as posted on our website. So thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you again at the next webinar.
Thank you.